All right, welcome back. We're here for the second part here. And for this one, we're going to go through the changelog. So this is all the changes in GT6 1500 that pertain to reactors. So the first thing is fuel rod maximum stat now relates to the number of neutrons on a fuel rod rather than its neutron output. And
Yeah. Before it was dependent on how many neutrons a fuel rod would output, and that is quite hard to measure. You have to do some calculations to actually find the value. So now you just can read it with a Geiger counter. It's much more intuitive now and also makes absorber rods more useful since you can basically get extra energy from it.
okay. And then the next thing is a note that says because of changes to the fission breeding system, which we're going to go over here in a minute, old fully automatic breeder reactor designs might not work anymore. There is, however, no risk of explosions from this change.
Yep. Breeding got changed quite significantly. Previously, you would just dump as much neutrons as you could onto a breeding rod, and you would get bonus neutrons absorbed the more neutrons you put onto it. And when the needed neutrons were provided, it would directly turn into the fuel rod. Now, if you breed a rod, the breeder rod has a new stat called neutron loss. And instead of getting extra neutrons, you, for putting more neutrons onto it, every time you put neutrons onto it, the neutron loss of the breeder rod gets subtracted from the number of neutrons you put on it. So you have lesser loss if you put more neutrons onto a rod, because it won't need to breed as long, because it will finish faster, so you won't have this loss as long.
Okay,
And
so
that
like the
also
thorium
makes breeding
230.
a bit harder.
Okay, so the thorium 232 has a loss of 1,000 neutrons, and it
Yes.
needs 64. There's no space or underscore or anything in there to break this number up. So give the
Oh,
3.
that is also something that I should fix then.
Yeah, because that's hard to read. I think it's 64 million neutrons that it needs.
Yes.
Okay. And then, wow, 238 breeder actually needs 256 million.
Yes. And also 2,500 neutrons is the loss, and that means you need the adjacent neutron rod to put out more than 2,500, significantly more if you want it to be somewhat efficient, which means you will have to use a supercritical breeder reactor.
So if you're
Subcritical
not
breeding is now actually impossible.
so if you're not putting 2500 onto that rod, it just loses everything under the 2500.
Yes, it will have 0 neutrons on it. You can measure that, and it won't absorb any.
Ah, okay.
We can
So
also
yeah,
build a breeder reactor if you want to show this right now.
yeah, sure.
This uses Sodium. Sodium increases the factor of fuel rods. So if it previously had a factor of 1/4, it will now have a factor of 1/3 that allows rods like uranium 235 to have an extra side open when you make a critical reactor for the breeder rod.
Oh, okay.
We will go over this when we go over all the coolants and the changes, but this is also a change. Previously, this wasn't the case, and
Okay.
it wasn't really that useful for breeding. So we need some uranium 235, then some reflector rods.
I got reflector rods here somewhere. You want these on 3 sides?
Yes.
Okay.
So we can still control it. It will still go supercritical because it in this view it has a factor of 1/3 and it has 3 adjacent reflectors. And we need a breeder rod. We can actually use the completely new lithium breeder rod.
Yeah, I've seen that one in there. I was wondering about that because I hadn't seen that one before.
This is a new breeder rod. It doesn't actually breed into fuel. It breeds into tritium.
Ah.
So you can get some tritium for your fusion reactors or for using it in burner reactors, because now you can also turn tritium back into tritiated water.
Now, this is also the stuff that you need to make the high-end turbine, isn't it?
Uh,
There was one of them that
don't think
needed.
so.
Where is it? Steam turbine needs graphite. There was one of them. There was one of them that you needed tritium for. I can't remember which one it was. I thought that was the adamantium. Is it? There's
Vibranium.
vibranium gas turbine. Steam turbine. Vibranium and dense adamantium. No, it's not that one either. I don't remember which one it was, but I know there was one of them that needed it. Because we had to, up until now, we had to replicate it if we found some tritium in a loot box.
You can also get tritium out of water for your fusion reactor.
Trinititanium, the pink one. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one we needed tritium for. Because you needed to make that alloy to make the outer part of it. Because it uses titanium for the inner wall, but the blades basically are made out of trinitanium. Thank you, XAR.
So you can now breed it, tritium, and you can then use it for whatever. So if you turn this reactor on,
what lithium does this use to?
it uses the normal one.
Oh, just the regular lithium you can get out of clay.
Yeah, I previously had it set to the other lithium. I think lithium 7. Because that would have been a bit more realistic, but it wouldn't be quite as useful, and actually be much more efficient to just use the lithium 7 in the fusion reactor by itself.
Did you take the thing off? Because this is not turning off.
Oh.
We're up to We were up to like
Ah,
31,
yes, I destroyed it.
3100. Just wanted to make sure
That
we weren't going to
would
go
have
kaboom.
gone terribly.
So what did you want this set at? Since we need above 250.
Yes, we need about 250. We can measure with a neutron with a Geiger counter. There's currently neutrons on this, so we know we are above this value. But we can increase it. For building breeder reactors, you probably want to go over the maximum to just breed much more efficiently. And it already turned into tritium.
Wow, that was quick.
Yes, lithium breeder rods breed really quickly. Another thing, a small tip. If you're building reactors with really high neutron counts, you might want to set the neutron sensor, the Geiger counter sensor, in hexadecimal mode. Because otherwise this can only go up to 9,999 neutrons. But in hexadecimal mode it can get up to 65,000 neutrons.
You're going
So you
way
can,
above what I would ever try to do.
there are actually a lot of setups where such high neutron counts are quite beneficial. So, another change with breeder reactors, it now won't output fuel rods directly, but it will output enriched rods. So you should have gotten an tritium enriched rod, which you can get some tritium out of.
Yeah, you put it in a canning machine and you get 500 liters of tritium out of it.
From a uranium 238 breeding, you will get plutonium 239 enriched rods, and if you centrifuge these, you will get your plutonium 239 and some uranium that didn't convert. You don't lose any material, but you don't convert enough to build another fuel rod, so you need to breed more than one rod. But a huge benefit of doing this is you can use filters to pull out things, and the enriched rods, they will only emit half the heat per neutron on them, like the breeder rods. So your reactor won't be at risk of exploding when it's done breeding if you don't take the fuel out, the breeder rod out.
Now, that's something I was wondering, but I got to interject something real quick. I was wrong on the material because this is actually tritium, not the thing you need for the tritanium or trinitanium, because that needs the other thing. I can never remember. It's trinium, which is a solid material, where what we get out of here is liquid. It's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different, not the same thing. Don't want to confuse anybody. This is what you actually use for reactors and the tritium water that you can use in reactors, which we'll talk about up there in a minute. Now, what was the question I had? I had a question. I forgot the question. Damn it. Anyways,
So another advantage of the enriched rods you now get is you can just stack them.
thank
Previously,
you.
when you extract them, you would get a bit damaged few rods and you couldn't stack them, which was really annoying.
That was my question. Is there a way of detecting when a rod changes?
Yes. It will have a bit higher of a neutron count because the neutron loss won't apply anymore.
Oh, okay. So you
So you
could
can detect that.
so you could tell by like this Geiger counter here would tell you that,
And not that one. You
or
would
no,
have
this one,
to,
because this one would
this
say
one would
there's
have.
nothing. So you'd
Yeah.
use this one to turn that off to pull out the done rod and then put in a new rod.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
It's a bit trickier than before, but it should be doable. If you really don't want to get into this, you could theoretically also periodically turn off this reactor and just have a filter. So it would only be able to extract the enriched rods.
Yeah, because you can actually put a filter on the top of a hopper and it'll only pull whatever you have set on that filter. I did that for tungsten when you have the byproduct from drying the tungsten acid stuff. It would only pull the byproducts out and it would leave the tungstic acid stuff alone so it could be mixed with uh, helium to make our tungsten. So that would actually work very nice for this because you could set it to only pull the yes, hydrogen, what XAR said. It would only pull the finished rod out, so when I put a new one in, it wouldn't just go right through.
Yes,
Okay.
but you would still have to turn off this reactor
Yeah, you'd have
somehow.
to check the counter or do it by
Or
a timer, basically.
yes, or just
Okay.
randomly. I mean, you could just every minute shut it down and hope that it's done. And if not, it just was down for a second.
Okay.
Um,
So,
yeah, we can continue with the changelog.
okay. So the next thing is breeder rods now have a new stat, which is neutron loss, which we already went over. Removed exponentially scaling bonus neutrons on breeder rods completely. The number of neutrons needed for any breeder rod got rebalanced for these system changes. I think we just kind of went over that.
Yes. One thing to note: these rebalances to the neutrons needed, they are not retroactive. So if you have old breeder rods, they will breed quite a bit quicker, I think.
Okay.
Or no, they would take a lot longer, actually.
Okay. Next thing is breeding new products enriched rods rather than fuel rods directly. This allows for slightly easier and less tedious automation. Enriched rods will, like breeder rods, output only half the heat but have no neutron loss, which allows detecting that a breeder rod turned into an enriched rod. And I think we just went over that as well.
Yeah.
And then added the lithium breeding rod, which breeds into tritium, which we just went over.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing would be reactor designs. This is just a note. With coolants other than industrial coolant, distilled water, semi heavy water, molten lithium chloride, or molten thorium salt may require changes to accommodate the following stat changes. And the changes being cobalt 60 fuel rod now has an emission of 0, making it useless for power production. It also lasts a much lower duration, making it more useful in burner reactors. Now, I have to disagree with you on the useless for power, because if you wanted a very low constant power, cobalt would work for that. If you just wanted to put like 4 rods in it and just let it go slowly and make you like a trickle amount of power.
Yeah, that is possible. But if you would want to use it to build a critical reactor like you could before to power your whole base, that is no longer possible.
Correct. Okay, and we kind of went over cobalt pretty well in the last one. Next one is output of better nuclear fuel from processing depleted fuel rods slightly halved. Now 6 depleted rods will allow you to get a new, better rod, which we also went over in the previous video. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's
Okay.
all it is.
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yes.
Depleted cobalt 60 rods now processed into thorium instead of uranium 238. Depleted Knockwood Drea now processes into cobalt 60 instead of thorium. So you can actually go from one end to the other and back again, basically.
Yes. Previously,
That's kind of funny.
cobalt was like out of the line and just an extra branch, and now it's much more. It's much nicer.
Okay. Not that anybody would ever be trying to breed cobalt 60 from Naquadria, but it is nice that you get a little bit you can throw back in to start the process all over again. One of these days, I will make a video showing the entire line of how you get from 60 to Naquadria, but that's not for today. Next is heavy water, tritiated water as a reactor coolant will now reduce the neutron maximum of fuel rods in it by 8/16 times. This allows for building much faster burner reactors, which we talked about burner reactors being the ones that deplete your rods faster so you can centrifuge them and get the better material out of them.
Yes.
So what this is saying is basically heavy water and tritiated water would be your best 2 coolants to use for that.
Yes. They also have the advantage that they also moderate the fuel inside them already. But you would probably use moderator rods anyway.
Do you want to take this time to go over the coolants, or do you want to wait till we get to the end? Since
I think we can get over them now.
okay,
So
don't look at the fact that we're using open block tanks for this. It's the only way to store a couple of the things, and it makes it visible for you. You should not use these to cheat Greg's system of being able to store steam or hot coolant. Anyways,
the liquid metal coolant, these got buffed quite a bit. That is molten tin and molten sodium. They are really useful for building breeder reactors because, as said previously, they will reduce the factor, increase the factor of fuel rods inside them. So a factor of 1/6 would would increase to 1/5. A factor of 1/4 would increase to a factor of 1/3. So you have more free sides for using breeder rods. They still reduce the heat you get from each neutron by I think 1/3 for the tin and 1/6 for the 2/1/6 for the sodium.
Okay.
So you won't get a lot of power out of your breeder reactors, but you can more efficiently breed rods.
Now, with it saying that, I just noticed this, it says this is a power conducting fluid. So any of them that say that can be used in a reactor.
Not all power conducting fluids, I think. I think lava also counts as a power conducting fluid.
Oh, I didn't think about that one. Let's see. Yeah. Well, actually, no. Lava says
No.
this is a simple fluid that is easy to handle. So, yeah, that might be an easy way for you to search for. If you just put in conducting, right there's a list of all of the ones that can be used in the reactor.
Mm.
Oh, I just fell in your pit. Okay, so next.
The gas coolant. So carbon dioxide got changed quite a bit. It previously, like the molten metals do now, would increase the factor, which would make it basically the best coolant available. Now it doesn't do that anymore. It doesn't play with the factor anymore. It just has a lower emission, so your critical reactors will be a bit more controllable. Helium also got changed. It now also doesn't affect the factor anymore. Previously, it would lower the factor, which was actually quite useless. And it's now just a bit better version of carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Molten lithium chloride didn't get changed. It still increases the neutron maximum by 25% and lowers the emission like helium, but the safe stat will be raised, which is actually bad for supercritical reactors, because that gets counted towards the maximum, but doesn't actually really contribute towards the neutron emission output. But it still is like the second best fuel for building your super critical reactors that are not moderated.
Okay. So these would be for moderated. These would be for unmoderate.
Yeah, the gases and lithium chloride is for unmoderated critical reactors. The water fuels are for moderated reactors.
Okay.
Because they also moderate the fuels, fuel rods inside them on their own. Water-based fuels didn't change that way, except for heavy water and tritiated water, which now decrease the maximum, as we already mentioned, which makes them extremely useful for burner reactors. So they now fill a proper niche.
Okay, so let me say this correctly. The molten metals are for breeding reactors that are not moderated?
Breeder reactors must not be moderated. If they're moderated, the breeder rod won't accept the neutrons.
Okay, so those are for breeders. These are for non-moderated critical, and these are for moderated critical, because they moderate it.
Yes.
Okay. And then we have the regular IC2 coolant and the thorium.
Yes, regular IC2 coolant didn't change at all. It's still the same as when Greg initially added the reactors. Molten thorium salt, stat-wise also didn't change, but it's now a bit easier to create, and your reactors will use up much less of it.
Oh, okay.
Previously, you would need something ridiculous like 35,000 thorium dust just to process one Naquadria rod at full energy output, max efficiency, which is a bit ridiculous. Now it's quite balanced. You will actually get more power out of using your thorium as thorium salt than you could out of just running them in industrial coolant reactors.
And this would be what I would consider your general purpose coolant and your super crazy coolant.
Industrial coolant is, I wouldn't categorize it as general purpose. I would categorize it as subcritical coolant. So if you want to build a reactor that isn't critical, you'd use industrial coolant because it otherwise raises the outputs of the fuel rod, but it lowers the factor quite significantly, which makes it unusable for supercritical reactors without moderation.
Oh, okay.
Without moderator rods.
Okay. I just called it general purpose because that's my go-to for when I build a reactor because it's just normal for what I'm used to. But that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's the changes. That's the fuels or the fluids that can be used for coolants. Let's go back to the changelog now. So, molten thorium salt is now slightly cheaper, which we just went over. Lasts much longer, able to be produced with all sizes of dusts. I think we went over that enough. Added a config option, which is easy U235 extraction to enable centrifuging uranium-235 from refined uranium ore. And then also there's a config option enabled 1x1 reactor core to enable the recipe for the 1x1 reactor core, which is now disabled. And the fact that those are config options means that they are both off by default. So you would have to turn those on.
I wouldn't recommend it. At least for the 1x1 reactor, which behaves in strange ways. It's not imbalanced, but it's weird. And the system is better off without it, in my opinion.
The only thing I could say for the 1x1 is maybe just make it to where it either cannot go from one to another like this. so you couldn't have a 1 next to a 4, or you could only go between a 1 and a 1. So the 4 chambers could interact with each other, or the 1 by 1s could, but they couldn't interact with each other. Or just the 1 by 1, because of how thick the wall is on it, it can't output anything to another reactor. That way you could basically just use it to burn up fuel rods if you didn't want to try to build a fast burning thing. Like I was suggesting, you could just throw 4 rods into one if you were really wanting to play around with them early and you didn't completely understand it. You could just throw 1 rod in and let it make you a little bit of power. That's the only real suggestion I could have for it.
It would not really be that useful in my opinion, and it actually would have some balance problems. I mean, the whole system is now balanced around having to use a 4x4 reactor, 2x2 reactor. So things like thorium salts are really designed to be used with a 2x2 reactor. Because you could actually get more power out of thorium salt with a 1x1.
Okay. And let's see, the next thing is neutron sensor previously behaving differently in maximum related modes on reactors using industrial coolant.
Yes, previously I don't actually remember how it worked previously, but now it works like on all the other coolants. The percentage mode, which you can configure with a screwdriver. This and the percentage compare modes. They actually compare against the neutron maximum of the fuel rod inside, or if there are multiple fuel rods inside, the sum of all neutron maximums in the fuel rod, and compare that to the amount of neutrons in the reactor.
Oh, so if you wanted it to stay, say, at 50% of the rod you have in there, you could set this to 50%, put the redstone switch on it, and redstone it up, and it would turn it on and off if it ever got above 50%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would probably want to use it to set it to something like 99. So just above, just under the neutron maximum, it would turn off. So it gets as close to it as possible.
Oh, for like the one we had down here where we wanted it to
Yes.
not hit the maximum but stay really close to it, we could have used that instead of the less than mode.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. By the way, you realize our cobalt has been just sitting here running this whole time.
I mean,
just
it's
noticed.
completely safe.
Yeah, I know. I just noticed the light on it. All the rest of them are turned off, but cobalt's just sitting there chugging away. Okay, so next thing is you added a guidebook for designing and operating the fission reactors. How do we get this guidebook?
It's found in, I think, dungeons and GregTech strongholds.
Did you add it to the zombie villager drop?
I think I could do that.
Because every other book gets pooped out of those guys. It'd be really nice if we had one that's actually kind of useful. Well, for new players, all of them are useful. For somebody like me, they're just fodder at this point.
It's actually quite long. It has 133 pages, but it has a lot of chapters, so you can quickly find what you need.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to read your PDF once about reactors, and I got about two sentences in, and I was like, yeah, no, this is too much for me. So yeah, this is 133 pages, huh?
The first chapter is just a bit of flavor.
Ah, okay. So now we have a new yellow book. Oh, and look, this one actually gives you technetium. I don't like that book. That technetium is one of the werebane materials, so I'm allergic to it. I really hope you can't hit me with that. And all right, we got to try it. I got
It's
my
actually
sap.
something Greg added. I
Yeah,
didn't add it.
try hitting me with the book. Okay, good. It doesn't work. Anything that has werebane on it makes me drop part of my inventory and get away from me, XAR. Yeah, it does that. And I gotta hurry up and drink my rainbow sap to keep from dying. I hate werebane. Greg is such a butthead. Anyways, let's get back to the serious stuff while you get to see my haste bubbles fly here. Setting the second facing of a reactor core to the same side as the primary facing will now disable the secondary facing. We discussed that in the very beginning of the last video, where it only shows the red side here, even though both sides are going this direction. I can grab my wrench here. You can see it only shows one side, and that's the front side. And I'm guessing this would be useful for the thorium one, right?
It's
Because you wouldn't want it to share the
yes,
inner one out to the outer
yes,
ring.
exactly. Yeah, for multi-fuel reactors, this is quite useful.
Okay.
Multi
Um,
coolant reactors, not multi-fuel reactors.
right. I knew what you meant. Thank you for clarifying it, though. Let's see. And then tritium can now be turned into tritiated water, useful as a reactor coolant when obtaining tritium from lithium breeder rods. We went over that with the lithium breeder rod. And fuel rods with neutron counts at the exact neutron maximum now won't have their durability affected. I think we went over that with the one we were talking about earlier, that we kept it right below.
I've
Or is,
it's just a little change. Previously, when your neutron count was at the neutron maximum, it would have counted as over the neutron maximum, and you'd get the 4 times lower duration. Now, if you're exactly at the neutron count of the maximum, you still count as under the maximum.
Oh, okay. So that was just a minor fix.
Yes.
Okay. And then the last thing is first second of neutron output of fuel rods being potentially lower than emission stat, in some cases even negative. Okay, you got to explain that one.
That's a really, really old bug. I didn't actually introduce it. Was in the first release of Reactors. When the reactor starts up in the first tick, it will try to calculate the bonus neutrons. But because there are 0 neutrons on the rod itself, and the self gets subtracted from that equation, it would create negative. It could create negative bonus neutrons. So it would, in the first tick, output negative neutrons potentially, which is now fixed.
Okay. So that's it for the changelog. Is there anything else we need to go over?
Nope. I think that was everything.
Alrighty. Well, as always, if you have any questions, let us know down in the comments in Discord, or you can always pop into Greg's IRC as well, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. Have a good one, and see you next time.